went back into the mid-90s, late 90s, early 2000s, and all the things that were happening there in the early days of advertising, maybe some of the controversy, maybe some of the frustration with is, I'm saying native advertising if you're not tracking with the panel. Everyone's on? All right. So I think that what we're going to talk about today is less about those, what is it, because there's definitions out there that say things like, I know it when I see it, and more about what it means for the industry, how it's being applied, what's happening with it, and I think it'll have you guys think a little bit differently. So we'll just start with introductions from the panelists. Maybe Jonathan, starting with you.
Yeah, my microphone just rubbed. I apologize. Jonathan Perlman at BuzzFeed, an award winner. Thank you very much. Thanks to the Academy, my mother. So BuzzFeed, we are a media company for the social age. Every piece of content we create, be that exclusive original editorial or advertising, is all meant to be shared, and that's basically how we measure the work that we do.
Hi, I'm Katie Zamowski. I am at Turner Media Group, and my team oversees all of our digital media planning for all of our networks, so working with TNT, TBS, Cartoon Network, Adult Swim. Thrilled to be here with this panel, and hopefully we'll be able to provide a strong brand voice as it comes to native advertising.
I'm semi-thrilled to sit with these gentlemen, and Kate, I'm actually very thrilled. Chris Cunningham, CEO and co-founder of AppSavvy. Our business is really focused on helping advertisers and agencies understand how and when to deliver a message. A big part of what we talk about here is who, but we never really understand when and actually what drives that. So our platform triggers ads based on native activities for both web and mobile within natural breaks of a user experience, which generally lends itself to a really great time for a brand message.
Hey everybody, Dan Greenberg here from ShareThrough. Started the company about 5 years ago, based in San Francisco, about 100 people now. And what we do is we help publishers, so like Time Inc. or like Forbes or People, we'll help them take what Facebook, Twitter, YouTube are doing with native, so sponsored stories and promoted content, promoted tweets, but bring that to their native experience at their site. So like a sponsored story on people.com or a sponsored piece of content on Forbes.com. I'm really trying to figure out how do we make native, buzzword aside, but how do we make native as a category scale and doing that from a technology perspective?
Great. I'm Lee from Tumblr. We exist just to empower the world's creators to make their very best stuff on our platform and then deliver them an audience that they deserve.
All right, great. Thanks, guys. So let's get started. This is one of those panels where I wish we could have just done this over lunch because the conversation that we had at our table earlier was great. So hopefully we can continue some of that same dialogue. Starting out with one of the things that we talked about is we're not going to define it, like I said earlier, but we think that there's a lot of change in the industry. Again, to the previous slides that we saw where we're talking about distribution and one side's advertising and one side's content. There's probably been way too much conversation about advertising when what we really think about is content. And for me personally, I always focus on, at our agency, about behavior versus technology and what's the consumer doing, which again, thanks Ben for leading us into the previous one. So let's start with just a thought about how is this affecting publishers? How are you guys seeing changes within the space right now? Maybe Chris, starting with you.
Yeah, I mean, what we see, and I think some of our companies, including Dan, share probably a lot of the same publishers, but today, the last 20 years has been built around a page-based discussion, ads triggered after pages and impressions, so not a ton of innovation there. However, people's behavior has drastically shifted from just reading passive content to doing stuff. So everyone in this room has checked in, pinned, commented, voted, a poll, and not just in gaming environments, but on Huffington Post or Time Inc. or People, large publishers. So the way that publishers that we talk to today are really understanding opportunities in front of them is that they have inventory, new inventory that they can create, which would be triggered based on that native activity as a alternative to ads that are in and around adjacent to what people generally don't see as much, which obviously we know there's challenges with display as relates to CTR and actually seeing the ad. So what's really exciting today is the largest publishers you can think of to mid-tier ones have never been more open and receptive to the idea of creating new inventory and leveraging a natural behavior on their site for a brand message. I don't think it would have been that, especially premium publishers weren't as receptive about a year ago as primarily social gaming, which is a segment that AppSavvy has led 5 years ago. But large companies, premium publishers are very open today, both from a web and mobile perspective, to create new inventory based on what people do on their site.
Yeah, I think what we're seeing is that we see our traditional publishers, so like Turner, we don't work with Turner directly, but traditional publishers like a Hearst or a Meredith or a Time, they're jealous of you guys. They're jealous of Facebook and Twitter and Pinterest and BuzzFeed and Instagram and all these new social platforms and content platforms who've essentially said, we're going to start from the point of view of native. You guys don't do any banners. You guys don't do any banners. YouTube sort of has some banners, but YouTube has 50% of the revenue is native. Facebook is 100% native. Twitter is 100% native. So all of a sudden now you have these VPs of sales saying, I'm in a room competing with guys who are selling content integrations and native experiences on their sites. I need to do something similar that's at parity from a user experience perspective, but native to my site. And I think you're seeing it across the board from the biggest publishers in the industry. Yeah,
and I think, I wrote it down, my notes from this morning. Dan, our first speaker, one of the things he said is don't change human nature. Don't try and change it. The growth at BuzzFeed has been incredible. Now, last month was over 60 million unique visitors. They don't come because we have great advertising. They're not coming to say, oh, let me look at some really interesting content as advertising. They're coming looking for content. And there's no reason that can't be a great piece of advertising content. And increasingly, it is.
That's a great point. I think thinking about it from a content piece, right, instead of just why people are coming here behaviorally. So I like this. There's jealousy, there's intrigue. It's sort of like the Game of Thrones of marketing up here. So does it really work? And full disclosure, Dan just recently did a study with the IPG Media Lab, which is a sister company of Draft FCB. But there's some really interesting results that came out of that. Can you talk about what you guys found?
Sure. So he told me he was going to ask me this question, so I had to write the actual percentage numbers down. But so we did a study. Brian Monahan, who actually I think was part of the ASPES Awards that we just did, so you should give him a high five.
Thank you.
He's at IPG. He ran this whole study for us. And so we tested two hypotheses, and I think you touched on it a second ago, which is these two things. One, are native ads actually seen? We know banner ads, some are seen, some are not seen, but are native ads seen more? Because that's the core hypothesis. If the content's in the stream of other content, it should be seen. And then two, this is more of a personal hypothesis for me, is there some notion of shared credibility that if you have a Tumblr post from a brand inside of Tumblr promoted as content in the stream of other content, is there some credibility that Tumblr lends to that brand? Or is there some credibility that BuzzFeed lends to that brand? I mean, of course, I think the answer is yes, but we wanted to test it. So two things. One, on the seen question, we found that native ads were seen 53% more times than banner ads. Banner ads weren't not seen. They were seen, but 53% more times people's eyes, it was an eye tracking study, ended up looking at the native ad in the stream of other content. And then second, I think this is more interesting. This is sort of a derivative stat. Maybe we can riff on it. But for previous buyers of a product or previous watchers of a TV show, when we asked them, do you personally identify with the brand in this ad, it was a 40% lift for native ads versus banner ads. And I think that goes to the shared credibility point, that if you're already a customer, there's an increase in this concept of personally identifying with the brand, I guess, because you share the credibility of the site that you're actually living on. And we saw from 50% to 70%, so 40% lift in that concept.
That's pretty impressive.
Can I just add something on to that I think is really interesting, is the shareability aspect of it. So, I mean, listen, you're more likely to become a Navy SEAL than click on a banner ad, according to data, which is fascinating. But the shareability, right? If Dan is my friend, if I share something on Facebook or Twitter or whatever else it is, and it's branded, right? The lift that you're going to have towards that brand is much higher for sort of obvious reasons. So yes, it's about the ad being seen, which it seems like in native it is, but it's also about creating content that is inherently shareable. Yep. You want to pass around.
The other piece of this, actually, I guess this is like the core hypothesis, and I think this is a really interesting concept, that if you just look at the basic click-through rates or the basic engagement rates, your engagement rates, our engagement rates, yours, probably yours too. If you look at the engagement rates of the native ads in streams of content versus the other content above and below it, we're actually seeing that it's at parity, if not sometimes higher for the ad than the content. And if you look at that from your Navy SEAL point of view, we're talking about ads here now that are as engaging as the content itself, which is a totally different paradigm for advertising.
So math would tell us that somewhere in here is maybe a Navy SEAL. That's true. No. Lee, I mean, you guys seeing the same kind of numbers?
Yeah, I think people are coming to Tumblr not because their friends are there, but because their passions and their interests. And so as they think about following these deep rabbit holes of amazing content created by this independent army of creators as well as brands, that the interaction and the engagement on the brands that are in the stream, we're seeing a lot higher engagement rate, similar to what you're saying, around those brand opportunities to tell their stories. Brands are the best at creating stories. They have been traditionally. They have the best assets. They have the best built-in audiences. They have the best capabilities to tell amazing, amazing stories on our platform. And so by us giving them the tools as well as the real estate to tell that, we're seeing that the engagement is going in that right direction as well.
And it's probably a pretty important thing for everybody out here in the audience as they're thinking about from a buying side, right? That kind of experience that a consumer can get from that.
Right.
So that was something I think we also talked about too. It's like thinking about content, right? So not thinking about it as advertising, but to what you guys were saying, it's like that's the reason people, what they're doing on the web, and we just saw some of those numbers with multitasking, right, of the behavior that they're doing. So how do we scale that? And I'll maybe start with Jonathan. Like, how do you scale that and grow? And is that even the right question?
I think it's the wrong question. Listen, scale is obviously important for a lot of reasons, and as I mentioned, you know, our growth has been up and to the right, which is wonderful. We now have an ad network of sorts. I don't love the term ad network for this, but an ad network of sorts where we will work with publishing partners of ours that will have a story that is native on their site that will lead to the ad content on BuzzFeed. But I really think it's about engagement. You know, I think that is a much more important aspect when we talk about ads than just scale, right? You could have your banner ad be seen or not, maybe by lots and lots of people, but if they're not engaging with it, if they're not sharing it, I mean, I keep coming back to the sharing aspect because I think it's the most fundamental aspect today in media is the shareability of content. I mean, you know, when you see something on the social web that someone has passed to you, again, you immediately, it certainly resonates with you. So I think, yeah, it's about content, obviously. Scale is important, but scale in and of itself doesn't answer any questions. It has to be relevant and engaging.
Yeah, and just to kind of represent the other side of the coin, you know, most of the attention around native is generated around the content sponsorship side, which obviously ShareThrough and BuzzFeed represent the other side, where AppSavvy would sit, or a company like Solve Media is triggered an ad based on the natural behavior. Solve Media, a CAPTCHA, we all know that vertical, which is working well, or other examples on premium publishers like, you know, uploading a photo or polling or commenting. So this is a pure ad. It's unmistakably an ad. You can't mistake it for anything else. And then to kind of echo Jonathan's point as relates to scale, it's how anyone wishes to define. If you want to define something as 0.10 below the fold, off to the right, low performance, but the number is 1 trillion and that's scale in your definition, then yes, there's not scale probably in the conversations that we're having, but in respect to quality advertising, context and timing, understanding what drives a view or a like, something that as an industry we haven't spent any time on, what drives performance, the conversation shifts very quickly with the top of holding company folks that we speak to, from scale to, oh, these are insights and data that I haven't seen before, that consuming and sharing get a higher view than another sort of activity. Can we optimize against that? So I think what this really boils down to, and I think what a big part of this conversation where there's consistency, is that we're at a point, an inflection point as an industry where people, the user experience, should trump everything else that we talk about. And I've been to 17 iMedias, and I've won an ASPE, and it's funny, over 3 days, and I love this. I'm touting myself for a minute. Thank you.
You're gonna go get mine.
When I said no selling, I meant about your company, not about yourself.
Back on track. But the point is that we don't at this conference or any other conference, and I love these guys, we don't talk about the user experience on any discussions, and we don't put enough emphasis on, if you want to focus on the user experience, well, then you have to understand the plumbing and the infrastructure. That's the publishers. So everything gets corrected when you actually start bottom up and you actually understand what triggers ads and when, and do publishers want to make a change. And I think today thanks to innovation, thanks to owned and operated businesses like Tumblr and BuzzFeed, and thanks to more of a network model, app savvies and share-throughs, you're beginning to see a rise of more quality and more impactful ad placements, which is trending in the right direction. Is it solving advertising perfectly? Absolutely not. Is it still ads, and do all people love advertising? Probably not. But is it trending in the right direction? Are dollars moving into this vertical? Yes. Are publishers paying attention? Absolutely. Is performance greater than traditional display? Absolutely. And there's enough data, I think, case studies that support this. And I think that's a very exciting, exciting call out.
Maybe just a quick question. So if your right arm was a graph showing your business growth, would it be, if you guys, this way, or this way for the four of you? Right? How's your business?
It's all this
I mean,
right?
I,
Like that? Yeah. So that seems to be the key. So the whole argument about like native advertising and this is like, well, clearly you guys' business is growing, right? You're doing more. There's been some recent launches, I think, from a couple of you as well. So I think that argument kind of pushed that aside, right? We know it's here to stay. Maybe in 10 years, the presentation looking back will be more about this genesis of where it goes. So I'm kind of interested, Katie, from your point of view, this question about engagement, is that something that you look at in terms of when you're buying, and how do you think about the platforms?
Absolutely. And for us, I mean, our ultimate goal, of course, is ratings. And so we recognize that we're going to get, the most viewers coming from television. So television is always going to be, a key part of our media planning. But so we have to look at it, how are we going to get our viewers to engage with the brands to talk about it? And so it's probably our top metric right now that we're looking at. And we've had great success working, with BuzzFeed and with Tumblr, with engagement rates that are exceeding their benchmarks quite significantly, and across the board. And not just for our shows that are, the younger segments, the TBSs or the Adult Swim, we're actually seeing that type of engagement with our TNT shows. And that typically, our median age for our TNT show is a 60-year-old woman. But we're seeing these rates that are, unbelievable to us because of that, they're actually participating as well.
So it's not just for the young at heart.
It is not.
Yeah. I mean, Lee, maybe you can talk about how you guys are doing that. I mean, how is that you're driving those pieces?
Yeah, so we have a team of people that look at the data and the insights from our platform of what's resonating, what's performing well from a segment. So Katie and her team will come to us and say, hey, this is the demo, this is the lifestyle, this is the tastemaker that we're trying to attract, this is what we think the show will do. And we'll come back with insights around that community and talk to her team about content creation, using the insights from that to follow, to engage with that community in an authentic way, to tell their story and bring more people into the process of creating great content and sharing it. And so that's something that we've seen great success with people on Katie's team.
Can I just say one thing? That we strongly believe that great content finds its audience. And so, I am not a 60-year-old woman, believe it or not, but my mother does fall into that demographic. And there could be a piece of content that I could see that doesn't necessarily resonate with me, but I know would resonate well with her. And if I ever share anything or pass anything along to my mother, I've like made her month, right? It's like, oh my gosh, you thought of me, it's wonderful. And so it's not just segmenting, but it's also allowing content to flow across the social web.
So Dan, I mean, you guys, and Chris, you guys approach it a little bit differently then. I mean, how do you see that flowing into that same kind of persona or that engagement?
So on the point of sharing, I think I agree with that. That great content finds its audience. I think our approach to it's slightly different. For us, it's less about users sharing content between users. Obviously, table stakes, you have to have share buttons on everything now. But really, it's more about, back to what I was saying before, about the shared credibility of publishers. That you've got these premium publishers, People.com and Forbes and these stalwart publishers that actually have these voices and this credibility for the past however many years, hundreds of years, 100 years. And so what we're doing, how many years? I don't know, 80 years? How old is Forbes? But the idea is, how do you take a piece of brand content and infuse it with that credibility from that site? And so in that case, it is about sharing. It's almost like Forbes is sharing the brand content through its own news feeds, through its own voice, through its own credibility. I think same thing applies with Tumblr. I know you guys have an ad spot, but really it's like Tumblr allowing brand content to be integrated into the voice of Tumblr, like into the ecosystem. So that's the piece that gets exciting to me, is brands and publishers can share credibility now as opposed to it being here's the content and then here's an ad that interrupts it, or here's the content and here's an ad on the side. They don't really have anything to do with each other, but it just happens to be there.
We think about bringing those brands into that environment. Just if you put 2 issues of Vogue on the newsstand, one with ads, one without, the one with ads sells out, right? It lifts the level of that content, of that overall experience, and that's what we think brands are doing with the community and the storytelling on Tumblr.
Which, according to we saw the numbers proved out then, right, in terms of that driving it.
And I like that Lee just called out, the storytelling piece, because if you take the theme of Mad Men, into this conversation, that marketing, it used to be much more about marketing and storytelling and emotion and feeling something, and that's kind of the experience when Don Draper walks into a room and does his pitch, and it's like, is that toilet paper? Is it a bar of soap? Like, you don't give a shit. You're just like, holy shit, I want to buy what Don Draper is selling me. But that's about an emotional connection. That's storytelling. And, I feel like there was a point that we as an industry did that a little bit better. And then we did, a few years back. And I feel like back to the term, this is actually a time that I feel there's greater storytelling opportunities that marketers can take advantage of. And I think the marketers and a lot of the agencies in this room are actually doing a great job taking advantage of it, and not necessarily getting too siloed in what they've always done. So again, the ability to market, get an emotion, tell a story in a way that is not sort of too static, it definitely has presented itself right now, and a lot of brands are taking advantage of it.
I think one of the challenges we've seen on that front, though, and maybe Katie, you can help us speak to this, is that you've got a separation of church and state just at the agency. You've got the media agency who's buying media, who would love to make content that's perfectly storytelling and fits right into the native format of Tumblr or BuzzFeed or whatever. But you've got a PR firm that's getting articles placed, and you've got a creative team, Crispin, that's creating video content. You've got a social team that's creating posts on Facebook, and then you have a media team who controls the budgets. And there's the connection point between the content and the media budgets often gets lost.
Usually that seems, to me, that kind of seems like the crux. Like, I know on Monday mornings at our office, people come in, they watch Mad Men, and it's like, wow, I wish we could, say those things that Don says. And then we realize, well,
and chain smoke.
Well, maybe
and
not.
drink. Yeah. Oh, well, you do that. Yes.
Then we realize, well, he's a fictional character, and he's got a great team of writers behind him. But it is about content, right? So and I think what you just said is like, that's really exciting to be able to have those opportunities to create those things, but it also seems really hard to do that. And that seems to me one of the cruxes of the concern, the frustration around native advertising, is that it's maybe not as easy to do as just buying a banner, not to trivialize that.
So that gets to the scale point that you were talking with Jonathan about. The use, brands have been accustomed to buying scale versus earning that scale through that storytelling and using that data to inform their content, to inform their stories, and to bring communities into it, versus just going out and buying and placing across the entire web.
So Katie, how do you solve for that?
It's a challenge, and I think you framed it up perfectly, and just you've got all these folks involved in the process, and we're fighting an education issue where people's understanding of native advertising is all over the board, as we talked about earlier. So when you approach the folks who need to create the content, you have to understand what their level of understanding of it is before we can even have a productive conversation. So, for my team, we just try to break down the barriers and, often just take over, work directly with, the Tumblrs and the BuzzFeed, and, ask for forgiveness a little bit later, because it's the easiest way to do it. And when we're seeing the success that we've experienced, it's a much easier story to tell.
So no names and present company accepted. How are you guys seeing that play out? Are you getting to your point, and is that scale working out, or how are you addressing that?
Yeah, well, the business is growing phenomenally well, so I think that answer is yes, it's working. There's something working. As far as these chairs are a little, I keep leaning back. I need a.
It would make an interesting panel, though.
Yeah,
Yes.
exactly.
On my behalf.
I think if you're looking for efficiency, right, and that's what you're buying on, and that's what you think is most important, then don't come to BuzzFeed or probably Tumblr.
You come to us. We're efficient.
We can make it efficient for you, but you know, it's gonna be much more efficient to just keep buying banner ads, right? Because you know, there's standards for them. But if you want to create something that's really back to a story, that's storytelling, that's compelling, that's going to drive tune-in or sell soap or whatever it is that you're trying to do, that can take a little bit more work. I mean, I think there are some venture capitalists who won't invest in our business because we require too many people. Right? We've got a 35-plus person creative team that's creating this content with the brand, with the agency. It takes a lot of people to make this happen, but that's when the great work really comes out.
So efficiency and engagement, right, are those two things of how those.
Listen, if you want to be innovative, I think in the innovation space, absolutely. You know, call me and then call Lee. That we can play firmly in that. I think
call Chris and Dan as well. Let's make an equal opportunity.
Yeah. Call all of us, but I think we can play really, really well in innovation. Right. If you're just looking for pure efficiency, then there are, ad networks and everything else that you can buy that are much more efficient.
And for us, we're display. I mean, we have 2 units, web and full screen interstitial for mobile, and a 600 by 300 for desktop. So large, beautiful ads is what we like to say at AppSavvy. So there's less work to be done, but our education challenge is the ad is triggered based on activity. What does that mean? Right? For some people, it's not a page view, it's not a page load. So you have to go, there is an education process. I think the only thing that takes time and patience is getting, back to the Adconian slide with the images of Google and how Google worked, right? And then there's video pre-roll, and iMedia, we used to be talking about how is it a 15 or 60 second, and then we go kind of through that evolution. Social networking sites. No one says social networking anymore because people know what Facebook is. Same cycle here. It's natural human instinct to kind of push back or call out something that you don't actually understand. It's just what people do. And then once you actually have some time to get educated and see it in motion, and more importantly, I think a school, I keep referring to this kind of school of fish. There needs to be more than 1, 2, 3. There needs to be several companies that at least look and feel the same, that are trying to accomplish the same goal, and they're coming about it from a different perspective, and all of our companies are. But there are some core principles that are consistent, and I think that is very important to pay attention to, and that's the whole. Why native, generally gets kind of that perception of like, oh, here's that word again. It's less about the word. It's more about, well, why are these companies classifying themselves or allowing themselves to be in that bucket? What do they all stand for? And if you look underneath the hood a little bit, you begin to identify that, okay, there's some core principles that they do speak, that they're all trying to build upon, which is better advertising, focus on people, context, et cetera.
And to your point earlier about user experience, I think the UX tied to behavior is really what we're talking about, right? And native is just a way to say put a bucket so it's easy to get put on an IO, or as a way to say these are the companies I want to talk to, and that becomes a trap as to what we're really trying to build from that.
Yeah, it further helps. Sorry, Tamara. It just helps with education.
Hey guys, sorry. So I just want to interrupt a little bit because I'm hearing a lot of conversation about native and that you can all do it really well. So, and Jonathan, you mentioned like, well, if you don't want to do this, you can just buy banner ads. So I think people are doing a lot of really great display advertising. I don't think they're just out there buying banner ads. And I think that native advertising is basically an evolution of what we were doing 2 years ago and 3 years ago and 4 years ago. So let's talk a little bit about that. I want to hear how we're just going to continue to evolve and be smarter versus, what we all think we're doing really well. Like, does that make sense?
I think that totally makes sense. That's how we tell our story, is that if you just look at display advertising on the web, this is just the natural evolution of it. Started with flat banners. It evolved into rich media, and so that was more about creating these creative experiences for the same placements. And now the placements have changed. They become part of the actual user experience itself. Like, the way I talk about it is that if the atomic unit of the site can be turned into an ad, that's native advertising. So if the atomic unit of Facebook is a story, then a sponsored story is the native ad format. It's not rich media, but it's still a display ad. It's just a native display ad in the newsfeed of Facebook. Or if you've got a sponsored story on BuzzFeed, that's just a native display ad in the stream of other content. And the actual ad part of it is the placement. The content itself is a different story. Like going to the actual BuzzFeed article, that's almost not advertising, that's just marketing and content creation and brand content. But the idea of taking that content and then turning it into an ad unit that lives natively on other sites, I totally agree. That is an evolution of display advertising. And I think it fits right in that $9 billion bucket we were just talking about. Native is a form of display advertising. And I think it's the only form, this is what's interesting, it's the only form that all the new platforms on the web of display, but of all the new platforms on the web, Pinterest, Instagram, Google Glass even, these guys are not going to do anything other than native. There's no chance that Google Glass does pre-roll, and there's no chance that Google Glass has banner ads that sit in the corner. But there will be ads, some sort of ads, and maybe what we saw before may be different, but it's going to be native. It's going to be part of the user experience. Lee, you made a good point, which is that search was also native. Yeah. I'm thinking of search as separate from display, and within the display category, what you guys are doing is a native form of display.
Yeah, I would just add to, I think it's the point, the question, and the kind of the point I'm hearing is, look, there's a lot of work has been done, and there's a lot of dollars already being spent in traditional display. The way I see it is, it's less about the banner gets kind of beat up a lot. It's less about the banner, to be honest. It's just more about how and when a message is delivered. That, I think, is the opportunity to actually spend some time on improving. It's, most conversations are, the banner, and it's more about how can the message be better timed or triggered versus, utilizing the same trigger points that generally people don't appreciate, which is when a page loads and things sort of pop up. I think that gives a nice extension to, improving upon what was built and actually making it better, but still using a canvas to reach people.
Yeah, and I think there's just been, every time that there's a new technology that comes in, right? So whether it was from print to radio, right? The first ad started, they were just reading the print ad on the radio, and then to TV, it was the radio ad, and there was a single static image, and it's gone down. I think what social has enabled is content to spread. And so I might disagree a little bit, Dan, that a BuzzFeed story is a display ad. I guess
when it's positioned on the homepage of BuzzFeed. I don't mean on the BuzzFeed.
Sure, I guess
put into an ad unit.
Sure, it's the ad unit. Yeah, it's displayed because it's displayed like anything else. But it's the evolution because we've gone to content now. Social has enabled content to be what's next, the next evolution of it. So. Yeah,
I think the analogy is rich media. BuzzFeed content is the evolution of rich media. You don't have some flashy banner ad with tabs, you have BuzzFeed content now. And then when you take that content and you put it into a unit on your homepage, that's the evolution of the display.
That sounds more palatable.
Yeah, and you guys do both sides of the coin? And even you guys, do you guys make content for advertisers? No?
Nope.
So am I hearing you guys say that there's not value then in like a homepage roadblock, that Yahoo charging $2 million for the front page of Yahoo to reach 80 million uniques, that there's not value there?
No, there's definitely value in that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't think anyone's saying anything that's that anyone's anti-banners. I think it's just it is an evolution. I think if you go to the major platforms though and you ask them, is there any chance that you're going to do a homepage takeover of Pinterest? They're going to say no. Right. Instagram, is it going to be a pre-roll that takes over the entire phone on Instagram? They're going to say no too. And so maybe there's a lesson to be learned from that, maybe not. But the publishers that we're talking to are traditional editorial publishers saying, yes, we do our big brand takeovers, but for the new platforms, and especially mobile, it has to be native to the experience because the publisher says so. Not because the brand says so, but because the publisher says, I want to do something that has a better user experience for my site.
Yeah, and I think if you're thinking about mobile, it's just really hard to make that. Right? You think of the board in line network. It's 8:30 on a Monday morning, and you're in line at Starbucks, and you're the 14th person. I've done these research studies because I've been in that line. Everybody, my phone's plugged in. Everyone takes out their phone. Right? That's just what they do to consume content until their coffee's ready. A big splashy homepage takeover. It's hard on that. So I would say it's not. There is value to it, but you have to understand the relative value with everything.
And in addition to that, to the Yahoo, if you look at New York Times and Boston.com, both of these companies are reinventing their ad products. So, you really have to think about that for a minute. They were, and so is Yahoo.
Yeah,
so we
Yahoo
want to work with Yahoo right now, and what they're telling us is come back in a quarter because we're rebuilding the site. So this is fundamentally happening across the board, as is with AOL. Every large premium publisher that we know of and have worked with has come to iMedia. All of them are asking themselves, what does our ad product look like tomorrow? And it absolutely does not mean that a roadblock or a takeover is ineffective. That's not what it means. It means, are there other opportunities that lend themselves to an ad for us, an ad trigger? Well, if 50,000 people a day vote, why can't that trigger an ad within context? What's the natural, what we always like to say to publishers is 2 questions, which publishers don't get asked. What do people do on your site? And generally, they always kind of look at you kind of dumbfounded. They're like, well, we have X amount of uniques. And we're like, we didn't ask you about uniques. What do people do on your site? Oh, well, people do that. What's the natural break of that user experience? Those 2 elements lend an opportunity for publishers to identify better points of time to reach a consumer. And you're going to see more companies invest in understanding more innovative ways to reach consumers. And they'll probably still keep a lot of what they have, the large premium impact, but I do think that you'll begin to sort of diminish lower performing, smaller units in replacement for new ad products.
I would definitely agree. And from our perspective, we still need the Yahoo takeovers. We need the, YouTube masthead for reach, and we're not buying that to drive the engagement that we're seeking. So we need to have the things, with the BuzzFeeds and the Tumblrs to have that engagement, so the consumers are interacting with the brand. So definitely complementary.
I think it's definitely not either or then.
No, it's a with.
Not.
It's yeah.
Though it's changing with the new devices. Like, I always think about it as the more intimate the device is, the less you can do big brand takeovers, and the more it has to be integrated into the content.
Yeah.
And
I think
so
that's
on
where
desktop,
we're going.
it can be
That's the
anything.
evolutionary
That is
path of it.
evolution.
On mobile, it's a lot harder to do a takeover. I mean, the moment I try to watch something on my phone, and all of a sudden it's a YouTube pre-roll, it's pretty quick to turn it off. Versus desktop, maybe I'll let it run. And really, when I do think about Google Glass, I know it's kind of a funny concept, but the stuff we just looked at before, whether that's the exact interpretation or the reality is different, it's not going to look like Coke pouring whatever Coke into your eyes. It's going to be something that's much more native to the experience. And I think actually looking at some of those examples just drives that point home even further. It has to be part of the experience because it's so intimate.
So it seems like in many ways we should be looking at how native redefines advertising for mobile and tablet then, right? What that experience is going to be, or goggles or other
Yeah,
devices
I
coming
totally
out.
agree with that. We have an investor, a guy named Mike Maples, who's on our board and has been kind of a mentor for me. And he was the first investor in Twitter, and just like one of those guys who thinks a couple steps ahead of me. And the way he put it, it was a simple concept, but it stuck with me, that with mobile design, there's really only one design. It's a news feed. Every content site has the same design. It looks different, but it's always the same. It's a news feed of content. And if you look at that mobile design, there's only a few places to insert advertising. It's not like a big takeover. It has to be something part of that content. And that actually his point was that mobile is eventually going to redefine the way desktop design is done. And you're already seeing that. The desktop design is getting taken over by mobile design. Even like usatoday.com, if you look at the website, it looks like you're looking at an iPad. You look at NBC News now, you're looking at a mobile news feed. It's hard to even tell if you're on your phone or your computer because it's all becoming one and the same.
Or the interactive television example that we saw.
Yeah, exactly.
So let's just in the next 5 minutes or so that we have, why don't we open it up to questions out here in the audience? So I think there's a few people with mics, and Tamara's out.
Perfect. Anybody have some questions? Is everybody trying to get to the pool? Wow. So, I think that our business is going to continue to evolve. And I think it's a plus. I think there's a role for it all. There's a reason that people still advertise on the Super Bowl, even if what Dan shows us is apparently it's not having the impact that, the study shows. So, talk about what we think is next.
I'll talk about that in relation to what,
Sure.
Listen, if anyone that says they know what's next, I think is probably lying to you, because who knows, but I think a lot of it is mobile. We're a mobile-first company, and what I was going to say is that we care about sharing. That's what the metric that means most to us. We see more sharing happen on a mobile device than we do on desktop. And I think it's all about the feed, right? You have to understand the environment in which someone is consuming that information and content. And mobile is native, I think, is more impactful on mobile than it is even on a desktop. And you didn't have, and I like to say, like, 20 years ago, you didn't have a laptop strategy, right? But today you're focused on your mobile strategy. It doesn't fully compute.
Beyond the fact that obviously brand dollars haven't come into mobile, DR and CPI dollars have through the more traditional mobile networks, but brand dollars are still waiting, and a big part of that is waiting for innovation where they can reach a lot of people, but that's all happening. I think something I mentioned earlier as far as the what's next, data and insights. Data and insights need to drive decision making and purchasing, and that hasn't been discussed. But understanding what drove performance, I know because our company knows because we talk to agencies all the time. They're not paying attention to that. So a big part of what we're trying to move forward is, wouldn't you like to know the 10 things that drove your view? Wouldn't you like to optimize your creative in real time to best match that activity? So for us, what's next is watching holding companies adopt next generation planning tools that help them capture data and insights that they're not utilizing today that go way past the who. We all know the who. We can get who from Blue Kai, Facebook's got who, Xlate, everyone knows the who, but let's start talking about the when and the what. That's something that because if we take that and combine that with the who, I think you have a very powerful advertising opportunity.
Dan or Lee, what's next for you guys? What do you see in the future horizons?
Yeah, we just launched our mobile ad opportunity as well within Tumblr, so we're excited about the future of that opportunity within our community. And I think as we get better at aligning tastemakers and having people, we have 104 million blogs with 45 billion pieces of content hosted to it. And so we think that we have great content for everyone. And so we're working on really quickly getting the right people to the right piece of content because we think we have something for everybody.
So content and mobile, Dan?
Say Lazy River. That's what should have been.
Yeah, Lazy River is the answer. No, I think I
That's
have a semi-thoughtful answer. When we started the company, we were video only, so we're just about how do you take video content and get it seen and distributed natively, but how do you get specifically video content? And actually, I was talking with Kristen over here at lunch. Our early customers weren't media buyers. Our early customers were the actual creative directors who made the content itself. So it was Crispin, and it was Goodbee, and it was Mother, and Droga, and Mechanism, and these amazing creative agencies who would say, I've made this beautiful content, it's better, it's a Super Bowl spot, or it's better than a Super Bowl spot, and I'm really proud of it personally, and I need to find a media budget to support this content to make sure it actually gets distributed. And for probably the first year of the company, we'd get these like $15,000, $50,000, $75,000 media buys from creative agencies that eventually, once traditional media buyers caught wind of it, they'd say, hey, this needs to actually be part of my group. Nick, actually, you're one of those guys who grabbed it. Nick was at Zenith at the time and grabbed it over from one of the creative agencies we're working with. And Zenith said, no, I get what you're doing, but we're Zenith. We need to do the media buying. And so we saw that with video, and that was 4 years ago, 5 years ago. We're now seeing that with PR firms with other kinds of content. Yeah. I'm sure BuzzFeed, some of your clients are PR firms. I'm sure some of your clients are PR firms. They're social media agencies or PR firms. They're creating the content. They don't have media budgets. But then they call you and say, I need to figure out some sort of master service agreement that lets me buy media without it seeming like it's media, because I want to promote my PR content as ads. I want to promote it. It needs to be seen. And so I think that's the next step, is we're seeing these PR firms, the bigger those media budgets get from PR, promoting their actual content, the more the Zenists and the Razorfishes and the Universal McCanns are going to step up and say, this is awesome, you kind of paved the way for us. Now let us do that. We'll buy the media intelligently with all the traditional planning and buying and strategy behind it, but using the content strategy that PR firms have set down.
So maybe in wrap, this should less be called native advertising and more about sort of the future of advertising and where it's going, especially in lieu of what's happening in the mobile and tablet space, how consumers are engaging, and the behavior that they have on those devices. So we don't want to stand between everybody and the lazy river. If there's any last questions? No, well, big thanks to our panel. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.